Hello everyone, I am the Benedict Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Wilds of Eldraine, Imodane the Pyrohammer. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description, it'll really help out the channel, and no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Imodane is a 4/4 human knight for 2 generic and 2 red. She has a triggered ability where instants and sorceries you control that target a single creature will also burn all opponents for the damage it dealt to that creature. This ability is incredibly powerful. Once you have Imodane on the battlefield, then something like Lightning Bolt can remove a utility creature while also dealing 3 damage to each opponent. So Imodane is a commander that definitely cares about direct damage, single target burn spells that can hit creatures. While I mentioned Lightning Bolt, it's actually excluded from this build. That's because I wanted to maintain a certain ratio of damage to mana value when building this deck. I wanted spells that could deal as much damage as possible with as low a mana value as possible. For example, a spell like Shivan Meteor deals a whopping 13 damage for 3 mana investment. Sure, you have to suspend it, giving opponents time to get rid of Imodane, but if she's protected, then 13 damage will be dealt to all opponents. Or you could just hard cast it for 5 mana, which isn't a bad ratio at a little less than half a mana per 1 damage dealt. Spells like Flame Slash, Redcap Melee, and Tundra Fumarole are also amazing and worth running since they deal 4 damage for 1 mana. Well, in the latter's case, since it rebates 3 mana for using snow mana, it's essentially free. So if you have other burn spells, you'd cast this one first and then get 3 colorless mana back for the follow-up spell. Redcap Melee requires hitting a red creature to avoid the drawback, but Imodane triggers even if we hit our own creatures, so it's not a big deal. Chandra's Defeat, Thunderous Wrath, and Nahiri's Warcrafting each deal 5 damage, with the first 2 requiring only 1 mana to do so. Granted, you need a miracle for Thunderous Wrath, but it's still viable. The first one needs to hit a red creature, but again, Imodane triggers even if we hit our own things. Nahiri's Warcrafting also doubles as card advantage, and if you multiply the damage dealt, you can dig even deeper. Unholy Heat also only costs 1 mana to cast, but you need Delirium to make it worth the slot. This is why, although the deck is mono-red, all 5 fetch lands it can run are included. Not only do these help thin the library of lands, but it also helps achieve Delirium. Instants and sorceries are obviously going to be in the graveyard, but lands help get there faster. Same with the other land-based ramp effects on Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, Burnished Heart, Canoptic Wraith, and Solemn Simulacrum. The first 4 have built-in sacrifice clauses allowing you to not only ramp for mana, but also increase your Delirium. The Elk and Wraith in particular, since they're both an artifact and a creature. Solemn Simulacrum ramps on entering the battlefield, but then it becomes an amazing target for burn spells. Which, getting back to, we have Meteor Swarm. The best way to use this is to just pay 1 for X so that you have a single target. That way you're dealing X damage for just 4 mana, which isn't a bad ratio at 1 damage per half mana invested. As for actual viable damage, the deck is running Blitz of the Thunder Raptor, Spite of Mogus, and Impact Resonance. The first 2 are amazing for mid to late game when our graveyard is full of instants and sorceries. The first one is also great against reanimation targets since it has the potential of exiling that creature if it would die, while the second one scries us 1 when it resolves. Impact Resonance is absolute insanity when followed up after another burn spell. Imagine casting this after Shivan Meteor resolved. You just dealt 13 damage again for just 2 mana. Or after casting something like Blasphemous Act, which is also in the deck. As long as any creature survived it, preferably our commander, then Impact Resonance will deal 13 times the number of creatures hit by Blasphemous Act. This card is just amazing here as a follow-up burn spell. Earth Tremor, Rumbling Rockslide Ambush, Seismic Strike, Scred, and Spitting Earth are more spells with similar effects since the damage they deal is variable, even though they have a constant casting cost, which is quite low in comparison as can be seen here. The first 2 care about how many lands we control, regardless if they're mountains or not, while the rest of them only care about our lands if they're mountains, with Scred specifically caring about our snow permanents. Scred, along with Tundra Fumarole, is why the deck is running 23 snow-covered mountains. This amount of mountains is good enough for the land-based ramp effects, fetch lands, and these mountain-based burn spells here. However, this also allows us to run a classic mono-red stacks effects like Blood Wound and Magus of the Moon. Granted, this will nerf the very few non-mountains lands in the deck. But more often than not, this will screw over opponents more than us. This also helps us survive long enough to kill the table, since we're potentially locking out multicolored decks from doing as much as they can. Now, if you don't like these kind of effects, you can definitely swap them out for 2 other cards. But I still recommend running them. They do a ton of work way more often than not. Going back to the variable damage burn spells, Chain Lightning and Electro Dominance are amazing here. With Chain Lightning, if we're targeting something we control, then we're the ones to choose to pay double red to copy it to hit a different target. While this might not seem like much, the initial cost is just 1 red mana to deal 3 damage, and then 2 red mana to keep dealing 3 damage. So the ratio is way more than X mana for X damage, like a typical X burn spell. And this is without considering damage amplification. Electro Dominance is the lowest one in terms of mana to damage ratio, but it makes up for it with its rebate. Not only are we dealing X damage to a target, but we can then cast a card from our hand for free if its mana value is X or less. Perforos's Intervention and Shatterskull Smashing might seem like similar burn effects at first glance, since it's X mana for X damage. However, the Intervention deals double X damage, which is still an amazing ratio of 1 to 2. The latter doesn't even take up a slot in the deck if you use it as a land when you miss your land drop. Then, if X is 6 or greater, it deals double that damage instead, giving us a similar ratio as Perforos's Intervention. As for further maximizing these burn effects to really get our mana's worth, the deck is obviously running damage amplification effects. While previously mentioned, these are the ones in the deck: Angrath's Marauders, City on Fire, Fiendish Duo, Fiery Emancipation, Fire Servant, Gratuitous Violence, and Sulfim Mayhem Dominance. You can also run effects that add damage, but I prefer these because they multiply damage. Unfortunately, opponents choose how these things are applied, so addition will always be worse than multiplication when together in play, since mathematically sound opponents can choose the multiplication effect to be applied before the addition effect. With these, you take away that option since it won't matter the order in which the multiplication is applied, thanks to the commutative property of multiplication. In any case, these are all stars here, particularly Sulfim since it has the potential of gaining an indestructibility counter. This makes it the best target for our spells that target red creatures, but it can also work with any other spell if there are no other creatures in play. The best thing about these effects is also how they interact with our commander. For example, if we cast a spell that would deal 5 damage to a creature, it would deal that amount times any multiplier instead. So let's say we controlled only City of Fire. That spell would deal 15 damage instead. However, if we controlled Imodane, she would then deal 15 damage to each opponent, but she's a new instance of damage. So City on Fire would have her deal 45 damage to each opponent instead. And this is without considering us having more than one of these effects in play. Same with the other creatures in the deck that further synergize with these effects: Brash Taunter, Stuffy Doll, and Donna Noble. The first two are indestructible, so just like with Sulfim, you can target them with Total Abandon when there's nothing on the opponent's side that needs burning. Best of all, they also hit opponents anyways when they take damage, so they also function as redundancy for Imodane. However, it's not overridden, so if you also controlled Imodane, she'd still deal damage across the table while you choose your target with these 3 creatures. Donna Noble doesn't have Indestructible, but she has Soulbound, so you can Soulbound her to a creature with Indestructible or any other creature you don't care about dying, like Solemn Simulacrum or others we'll soon see. You can also make any creature indestructible in the deck thanks to Darksteel Plate and Mithril Coat. The deck doesn't have many creatures, but giving indestructible to at least our commander also helps the burn strategy while also keeping her alive. Do keep in mind that if you equipped her or any other creature with something like Lightning Greaves, then you cannot target them with your own burn spells. This is why the deck is not running it, and instead running Swiftfoot Boots and Champion's Helm since they grant hexproof. They're still important to include so as to help protect our commander, since indestructibility doesn't protect against tucking, exiling, or bouncing. That being said, indestructibility is amazing when combined with Pariah's Shield. That way we don't take any damage. Oh, an opponent has lethal on board betwixt their creatures? Good luck alpha striking me when an indestructible creature is equipped with Pariah's Shield. In fact, it's even worse for opponents if the shield was equipped to the previously mentioned Brash Taunter or Stuffy Doll, because not only will the damage be redirected to them, but then they'll deal that much damage to an opponent. And if we had damage multipliers in play, it's even more. Who thought there'd be so much math in a mono red deck? Conversely, if an opponent has protective effects in play, Arcane Lighthouse, Detection Tower, and Shadow Spear help us deal with that. These debuff effects help us get rid of Hexproof, Shroud, and Indestructible. That way we're sure to kill anything that needs killing with our burn spells. Best of all, the first 2 don't even take up slots in the deck since they're lands. The only downside is having them in play when you need to play Blood Moon. But if an opponent is locked out thanks to it, it's a good enough sacrifice. Shadow Spear also gives lifelink as a bonus. so equipping this to Imodane goes a long way since she deals a ton of damage, or even to something like Brash Taunter or Stuffy Doll. They also help with the deck's actual interaction: Chaos Warp, Guthrie Wright's History, Wild Magic Surge, and Tibalt's Trickery. Sure, the deck's burn spells will more than likely kill most things on the board, but they can't burn non-creatures. Maybe they could hit planeswalkers, but surely not artifacts or enchantments. These 4 effects do have the potential of giving an opponent a better thing than what they shuffled away, but sometimes it's worth the risk. We are playing mono red after all. Going back to making the most of dealing damage to opponents, Grafted Exoskeleton is almost an immediate win con here. Having Imodane equipped with this could very easily end the game in a single turn. Sure, Infect is frowned upon in some circles, so this might be a meta call just like Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon. But games need to end. And you're playing mono red, which isn't as strong as other color combinations in the format. Zada Hedron Grinder also has the potential to end games quickly. While the deck isn't running many creatures, being able to copy your burn spells to all of your creatures means that it's yet another way to multiply the damage being dealt, especially when we control Imodane. However, if we make Zada, Imodane, and any other creature indestructible, we could potentially end the game with one well-timed big burn spell. Thanks to Zada, the deck is running Dwarven Mine in order to also make the most of the fetch lands. It doesn't take up a slot on the deck, but when fetched in at instant speed, it can provide a chump blocker in a pinch, along with a red body to absorb one of our burn spells, or another body for Zada to copy a spell for. The rest of the deck is the essential card advantage and mana acceleration pieces of any commander deck. While we're in mono red, we can still make do with our card advantage pieces in the form of wheel effects. The deck is running Dragon Mage, Magus of the Wheel, Ruin Grinder, and Runehorn Hellkite. Of these, only the first one is repeatable since it happens whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent. It is a bit costly, but by the time we cast it, we might already be running on fumes. Magus of the Wheel self-sacrificing is also great for Delirium. Ruin Grinder is an amazing target for burn spells because it triggers on dying and is a red creature even though it's an artifact. The Hellkite only works if it's in the graveyard, so it's amazing on the board as a threat in the air or aerial blocker, but then once in the graveyard can function as a wheel effect. Eye of Vecna, Mind's Eye, Maze Mind Tome, Seer's Sundial, and the One Ring are the remaining card draw effects. The fetch lands also help by potentially triggering the Sundial twice in the same turn, essentially giving us 2 cards for 4 mana. The One Ring is a bit pricey, but it's one of the best cards here. I wouldn't necessarily run it in every deck, but in a mono red deck like this one, it does a ton of work. As for mana acceleration, what better acceleration than cost reduction? To that end, Ruby Medallion, Primal Amulet, and the Immortal Sun are included. These help us cast more spells per turn, which is amazing at casting burn spells after one another for an explosive turn. As a bonus, the Immortal Sun also draws us an extra card in our draw step, pumps our creatures, and nerfs planeswalkers. This deck isn't running any planeswalkers, so we don't care. Primal Amulet will transform more often than not into Primal Wellspring. This isn't optional, so we do lose the cost reduction effect. However, we can then have a spell copying effect on a land. Being able to copy a powerful burn spell for free is absolutely insane here, since Imodane doesn't trigger on cast. She triggers on the spell, dealing damage to a single targeted creature. Speaking of lands, Ancient Tomb and Nykthos Shrine to Nyx do a ton of work. Yes, they're nerfed by our own Blood Moon, but I'd rather lock an opponent out of the game than to be able to generate higher ratios of mana. At least Soul Ring isn't affected by Blood Moon effects. This is the only mana rock in the deck since everything else is cost reduction or land-based ramp. Like Realmbreaker the Inversion Tree, the last card of the deck. Not only does this disrupt opponents because it mills them, but we're also playing one of their lands from their graveyard. Then, if they were to get that land back, it's exiled instead. The deck doesn't have any Praetors, but getting lands for just 2 mana each turn is good enough. At worst, those lands will only help pay for generic costs, but with Blood Moon, we're getting new mountains each time. Again, consider Blood Moon effects when building Imodane, especially since the deck has the potential of ending games relatively quickly for a casual deck. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Imodane the Pyrohammer. I absolutely love effects like this that makes burn a viable archetype in Commander. You don't need to run the absolute best burn spells since you can maximize the potential of a lot of obscure burn spells that wouldn't be good otherwise. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.